Welcome back to another Pokemon video. This time, not a tabletop video, actually a top 10 decks video. The Merida Regionals just happened. It was the first regional with Prismatic Evolutions legal, and we saw a significant shift in the metagame. So I figured with UIC around the corner, it'd be a perfect time to come out with another top 10 decks video, talk about which archetypes I like and which I think are kind of underperforming. And also, I'm going to have deck lists for all the decks as well. So with that in mind, let's get right into the tier list. Coming in at number 10, I have Regidrago, and honestly, this is probably a generous rating for Regidrago. I just wanted to talk about it. First of all, Badoo is a major issue for the deck, but also the bigger issue is that all of your good matchups have kind of faded away, right? With Badoo coming into the format, no one's really playing Charizard anymore, and that was kind of your best matchup. Additionally, no one's really playing Lost Box, even though Regidrago kind of fell off, which makes Lost Box a little better. Badoo kind of hurts Lost Box, and also, I mean, we'll talk about Lost Box after this, but essentially, also your Terapagos matchups, those seem to have faded away, right? They can't rare candy their Pidgeots, so that's another kind of good matchup that we're kind of lacking. And then there's a bunch of problems. All the good decks in the format are bad matchups, right? We got Lugia, Archaludon, Miraidon, Bolt, right? All big problems, all pretty prominent. I mean, I would say Raging Bolt is kind of on the decline a little bit, but these other decks definitely very prominent and definitely an issue for Regidrago. If you wanted to play the deck, this is probably the list I would go with. There's no respect for Badoo in the deck. I just don't think it's really necessary. I think against Dragapult specifically, for the most part, you can just ignore the Badoo. Just don't cure them. And really all you have to do is kind of adapt your play style to being a little more cautious, use Dragapult a little bit more, and then otherwise other decks aren't really playing Badoo. Gardevoir hasn't seemed to have picked up on it, and other decks, it just doesn't make any sense at all. The Noctowl is in here mostly because it's really good against Gardevoir to be able to Noctowl for Prime Catcher Cologne, bring up the Manaphy, which everyone seems to be playing, and then you can board wipe them with Kyurem, potentially V-Star, do it again. It really just lets you pull off that Kyurem play without flipping your V-Star. As well, Lugia has seen a pretty significant uptick in play, so we're rocking the Sinnoh. Works well with the Noctowl as well, lets you search it out, and the Jamming Tower as well for the Gardevoir matchup. Now, you could probably get away without this Jamming Tower, actually. Gardevoir decks seem to be less reliant on Bravery Charm, but it is still really good to just throw a Jamming Tower in play on turn 1. Coming in at number 9, I have Gouging Fire. Again, perhaps a generous rating, but I wanted to talk about the deck, and I think this deck actually does have some potential. I put a bunch of question marks beside the strengths because I haven't actually had a chance to really put much time into this Gouging Fire deck, but in theory, it seems like it's probably decent into Miraidon. It seems decent into Dragapult with the ability to heal your board with the Monkey Dories, with the Switch Carts, and the Lugia matchup seems good for similar reasons, right? You can use the Monkey Dory to KO Lugia's Pokemon through Gift Energy, through Legacy Energy, right? The numbers line up pretty well. You can Blaze Blitz for 260 into like a Lugia V-Star, and then you can use Monkey Dory to pick up that KO, take 2 prize cards, ignore Gift Energy, which sounds pretty good to me. The weaknesses column is pretty large. I mean, Charizard and Lost Box, kind of irrelevant decks, so that those don't matter too much, but Raging Bolt seems like just a better 2 prize trading deck. I imagine you would run into some problems there. And then the Gardevoir matchup doesn't seem particularly good either. I've played this matchup a few times from the Gardevoir perspective, and I felt very, very favored. Now, you can use the Monkey Dories to take out like the Drifloon and the Screamtail, and that's good, but when you're getting spammed by Iono and Gardevoir is getting a little tactical, they can attack with Gardevoir EX in some situations as well. You can really run into some issues. So, not sure where this Gouging Fire deck sits exactly, but right now, I just have it at number 9. And of course, the list we're going to be going with is Mauricio's list from the Merida Regionals. Again, I'm not entirely sure if this is the best list for this deck, probably the most uncertain I feel about any deck on this tier list, but at first glance, I'm not really sure why there's a Fluttermane in the deck, but otherwise, the list looks pretty solid, just attacking with Gouging Fire and Monkey Dory. You got the Delphox in there as well, probably very, very good against Dragapult. Now, I might have to take this deck to League on Friday to see if it's any good. Let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see some Gouging Fire gameplay, if you think this deck's good, if you think it sucks, because I'm really not sure. Coming in at number 8, I have Lost Box. Now, on the lower end of the tier list, but I do think this deck is a little bit underrated, right? Regidrago is kind of shifting out of the format, and a lot of the top decks aren't really respecting it. For example, Gardevoir decks don't really seem to be playing Klefki, which was a major issue in past formats. And now they seem to be favoring like Fluttermane for the mirror match, Mawile, Cresselia, those kind of cards are seeing a little more play than Klefki. Additionally, the Miraidon matchup is pretty favorable. I was talking to Drew Hedrick the other day, and I thought the Miraidon was favored, and then we played some games, and he cooked me. Drew Hedrick, amazing Lost Box player. So, I mean, little spoiler, I just have his list on here, but also the Raging Bolt matchup, pretty good. The Archaludon matchup, very good. They just don't deal with Pikachu EX. We can take a look at the list here. It's Drew Hedrick's list from the Merida Regionals. I imagine that he put a lot of time into this list, much more than I have. So, I mean, at one point I was playing a list without the Radiant Greninja, and I was really enjoying that. So, if you want to know more about this Lost Box deck, you can check out my other video where I was featuring no Radiant Greninja in my Lost Box Pikachu deck. But Drew Hedrick finding success with the Greninja, with the water energies. He's opted to go down to 1 basic metal energy, which I suppose is fine as long as you never have to loss own it or prize it. It does seem arbitrary whether you play 1 metal or 1 grass. So maybe if you were going to play this deck, I might switch and play 1 grass, 2 metals, because maybe other people will think that you're playing 1 metal. You can get a little mind game going on there. Otherwise, the list looks super straightforward. 4 counts of all the important cards. I love to see the Pokegear. I think that's a significant boost in finding Colress. Another thing that could be good in this deck is an Artisan. I was talking to Drew, and under Badoo, sometimes it's nice to be able to Artisan for Cramorant, because otherwise, if you get Badooed in the early game, sometimes you just kind of sit there draw passing for a long time. So this is the Lost Box deck that I would be playing, but I think there are some better options out there. Coming in at number 7, I have Charizard. Now, some of you may think that it's criminal for me to have Charizard at this point in the tier list because it gets wrecked by Badoo. But if you really think about it, the only deck that's really playing Badoo is Dragapult, which you're horrible against anyways. Historically, Charizard's always kind of lost to Dragapult. And the other thing that Charizard has going for it is that Regidrago is kind of gone, right? So it feels like Charizard is in a very similar place in the format as it was last format, right? The best deck in the format was Drago. That was a bad matchup. But if you're willing to look past losing to the best deck, yeah, that's not great, eh? But if you're willing to look past losing to one of the best decks, Charizard has a lot of good matchups, right? Miraidon, super favored. Gardevoir, I think, is really favored, especially as these lists seem to be showing less and less respect for Charizard. We saw Michael Davidson's list where he also credited Henry Chow playing like Hero's Cape. There was no Drifloon. I think there might have been a Mawile, so that they can still Mawile the Pidgeot and kind of deal with your Pidgeot that way. But really not a lot of respect for Charizard. They also, were they playing the Spiritomb? I can't remember, but I think they were playing the Spiritomb actually. Additionally, Charizard pretty good into Archaludon and pretty solid into Raging Bolt. And then it's like okay into Lugia. That's probably the only other weakness on this list. Now, as far as the list goes, I really like Jackson Ford's Secret Box list from LAIC. I made one change to it, which was to put a Jacques into the deck. I think that card is really good at setting up your evolution Pokemon, give you a little bit of a chance under Badoo. Maybe like on turn 1, you can Arven for Secret Box for Jacques, and then on turn 2, you can like Jacques for, maybe Dusclops, blow up the Badoo, or just get Charmeleon down and try to play the game that way. I don't think it's worth trying to play like a Pidgeotto or like Grand Tree. I saw a list on Twitter with the Dunsparce. I don't think any of those options are really good. You kind of compromise the functionality of your deck to try to beat Badoo. So instead, just take the hard loss to Badoo. Hope you don't hit it and have a generally good time into the rest of the format. It doesn't seem so bad. Up next, we got Lugia coming in at number 6. I don't have too much to say about Lugia. It's kind of the same deck it's been for a long time. I think in the current format, the biggest strength it has going for it is that it's pretty solid into Dragapult. Not an auto win by any means, but Dragapult, highest played deck at Merida. I expect it to continue to be the highest played deck, and it's pretty solid into it. Some weaknesses, I think the Gardevoir matchup is pretty atrocious, especially if they're playing a list that's kind of teched out, right? If they got the Spiritomb or like an E-Hammer for some reason, that is really bad. Also, Miraidon saw a lot of success at the Merida Regional Championships, and this deck's pretty bad into Miraidon. Also, not an auto loss, though. I think that people, you see Lugia, it's weak to Lightning. You see Iron Hands, it takes an extra prize, and you think the matchup must be unwinnable. But I've definitely seen Lugia win some games against Miraidon. Maybe they whiff a few generators, and you can steal some games. So I think this deck's still solid, but not my number one choice. Here's a list I would be playing. A couple callouts to be made are that there's no Cinccino's in this Lugia list. So another weakness of this Lugia list is that it kind of loses to Archaludon because you're not playing the Cinccino's. You can't really deal with an Archaludon. You can deal with it once with Weirdeer, but that's about all. Otherwise, the Thornton, I think Thornton is incredible against Dragapult. The ability to put down Regigigas, have it get KO'd, and then Thornton to bring it back. Just incredible. Also, having the ability to discard key attackers in the early game when like you don't really want to commit to benching them, like benching a Blood Moon on turn 1. Like imagine you have a Research and Blood Moon turn 1. Like, do I bench my Blood Moon? That sucks. Do I discard it? That also sucks, right? With a Thornton, you kind of get that option to bring it back. Also, the Iron Bundle, a big call out. I think this card is really, really strong versus Gardevoir. Also really strong versus Dragapult. There's kind of a lot of situations where like you amp on turn 1 or sorry, not turn 1, on turn 2, and then your opponent puts a massive EX Pokemon in the active, like a Dragapult or a Gardevoir EX. And it's really nice to just be able to bundle, force up a more frail Pokemon, take 4 prizes with your Iron Hands, and then Weirdeer or Regigigas or Drapion can come in and take those last 2. So that's my Lugia list. Also 3 Mesagoza. I think that's honestly one of the most underrated consistency cards in Lugia. You could probably play 2 in a Great Ball if you wanted. I'm like not super passionate either way on that, but I do value the high consistency of this list. Before I get into the upper half of my top 10 tier list, I want to take a second to plug my sponsor, Endgame TCG. They've got some amazing sleeves and some great colors. Fortunately, it looks like they're not selling the blue sleeves currently that you might have seen in my videos, but they've got the lilac, they've got the poppy red. These colors look super nice. I mean, they got black and white too if you're more of a classic vibe, I guess, but the sleeves shuffle nice, they're super durable, and I highly recommend them. So if you're interested, there's a link in the description down below. You can use code ROWAN for 10% off. Coming in at number 5, I have Archaludon. Now, this might be... No, I think this is a pretty solid place for Archaludon on the tier list. It has a pretty favorable Miraidon matchup. Even if they're playing the Zapdos, I mean, that is a game changer. Of course, if Miraidon has a Zapdos, they can amp your little Duras, and that really changes the dynamic of the game. But we saw most of the successful lists at Merida weren't playing that Zapdos, meaning your Miraidon matchup is actually pretty good. Also, I think the Lugia matchup is pretty good if they aren't playing Cinccino. I think at Merida, a lot of them were actually playing Cinccino, so maybe that Lugia should be in the weaknesses column. But another pretty big weakness of Archaludon is the Gardevoir matchup. I don't think it's particularly good. Now, if people are going to be playing Hero's Cape and not playing Drifloon Charm, then that matchup gets a little bit better, but still not super favorable. I also think the Dragapult matchup is pretty solid with this deck. I probably should have put that in the strength column as well, but I don't think it's significantly favored. Maybe like a 60-40 kind of matchup for Archaludon. So pretty solid deck as far as the list goes. I mean, of course, I'm going with the Dialga. I think Dialga provides opportunities for you to win games where you otherwise shouldn't, right? Maybe you go down a few prize cards at the start, or maybe you're playing against a bad matchup, but you can often just win by getting like a big Star Chronos play. Maybe you like counter catcher up a frail Pokemon, Star Chronos it. Like maybe against Dragapult even, for example, you could like Star Chronos the Dracloak, and then you can Metal Blast the Dragapult, maybe take all their energies off the field, maybe combo in an Iono, and I think that's really where the strength of this deck lies. You'll notice 2 counter catchers in the deck and Thornton, kind of just trying to assist with this Dialga idea. Then I got 3 Professor Turo scenario in here. I started with 2 Turos and a Palpad, and honestly just found Palpad to be super underwhelming. So I put a 3rd Turo in the deck for some more healing options. very good against Dragapult, very good against Gardevoir often. I mean, your guy has 300 HP, so you're going to be taking a lot of damage and then healing it. So I think this deck pretty solid overall, but nothing crazy. Coming in at number 4, I have Raging Bolt. Now, I think this deck is also kind of underrated. I don't hear very many people talking about Raging Bolt, but if you take a moment to think about it, it is actually fairly well positioned. It takes a solid Dragapult matchup, it takes a solid Miraidon matchup, and its biggest weakness, admittedly, is Gardevoir. But, you know, again, if Gardevoir lists are going to be playing this Hero's Cape idea that we saw perform well at Merida, then maybe, and they're not playing Drifloon Charm, maybe there's some room for Raging Bolt to come in there. As far as the list goes, I just got an edited version of Caleb Gedimer's regional winning list. I think he won maybe Louisville it was. Anyways, a little while ago now, but the only change I've made to his list is I play an Iono. I think I cut a Pokegear for it. That just seemed to be the worst consistency card in my opinion. I really value the Iono in honestly a lot of matchups. It can be good versus Dragapult. It can be good versus Gardevoir even. And definitely can be good against Miraidon, especially when your opponents just don't give you credit for actually playing an Iono, and maybe they like play a board state without much stability on it. You know, maybe they don't bench Fez, and they don't have like a lot of Dracloaks because they're just assuming they're going to get to keep their hand, and then you can hit them with an Iono. It's often very, very powerful. Could also hear an argument for the Iono being a Roxanne, but I think having the ability to just like play Iono in the early game, you got a dead hand and an Iono. I think there's some merit in that for sure. Coming in at number 3, I mean, this should be no surprise, Miraidon. Safe to say this deck dominated the Merida Regionals. It has a really strong Lugia matchup, a pretty strong Gardevoir matchup. Got to be careful for the Mawile though, otherwise should be good there. And as far as weaknesses, like Snorlax, I guess, is a bad matchup, and Raging Bolt, which seem to be 2 decks that people don't really care about and aren't really playing very much. Additionally, I didn't put it in the strengths column, but I think the Dragapult matchup is pretty solid. Another kind of 60-40 situation. If you get going quickly, maybe especially when you go second, you get that turn 1 amp, there's definitely some opportunities to just run over your Dragapult opponent and basically not let them play the game at all. So I think that is very good. As far as the list goes, we're just rocking Azul Garcia Griego's list, which was pretty closely resembles Landon Caitler's list from, oh geez, actually don't know which Sacramento regional maybe I think is where this came from. But if you want to hear kind of where this deck list originated from, I do have an interview video out with Landon. You can go check that out. I'll link it in the description down below. But Azul's list playing a Switch Cart and a Rotom V. Those were kind of the adaptations from Landon's list, I believe. The Switch Cart makes a lot of sense. You don't want to lose to Mawile in Gardevoir. In theory, if you start off the game with an Amp, they go Mawile, you go Switch Cart Amp, they can Mawile you again, and then you would lose the game. But when you're aggressive like that, it's often really difficult for Gardevoir players to actually double Mawile you. I've heard some consideration for playing 2 Switch Carts in Miraidon to beat that Mawile plan 100% of the time, but I think you beat it enough of the time with 1 Switch Cart that I think 2 is probably a little bit excessive. Otherwise, the Rotom, pretty solid as well. It just gives you some flexibility on turn 1. You can Miraidon, especially in matchups where you really want to be using Iron Hands or like passing, for example, like against Dragapult, like attacking with Raikou on turn 1, for example, pretty bad. So if you whiff that Iron Hands, you can just go ahead and use Rotom. I think that's a super solid inclusion. Coming in at number 2, I have Dragapult. I think a lot of people have this at number 1 right now. The deck is super solid, but brings a new kind of side to the deck that it didn't have before. It allows you to slow down your opponents. It's also pushed out a lot of Dragapult's worst matchups. For example, Regidrago, kind of a bad matchup before, and now it's been pushed out of the format. A lot of just the like turbo-y decks that can often run you off the board get a little worse when they can get item locked. So strengths for this deck, I mean, of course Charizard, but kind of who cares. No one's really playing Charizard. Snorlax, again, who really cares? No one's playing that. And Lost Box, same thing. So most of your best matchups are these kind of random decks that have been pushed out of the format. But the deck doesn't really have any weaknesses either. Like, I suppose Raging Bolt is probably not a great matchup. Also, I mean, I said it before, Miraidon, not a great matchup, but it's not like any of your matchups are super detrimental. I think the Gardevoir matchup is also slightly unfavored, but definitely completely winnable. So it's kind of one of those decks where it just has a chance against everything. I would say it probably has like a 45% win rate on paper against most of the format. That's not true. There's a lot of just really good matchups, but they're not very good decks. So nothing bad to say about Dragapult. This is the list I would be rocking if I played this deck to EUIC. Kind of inspired somewhat by Aiden Koos and Brent Tonneson, and somewhat of just what I was doing before. I really value double Dusclops in the deck. I think it's really good versus Gardevoir to be able to pop your Dusclops onto a Kirlia, counter catcher up the other one, and then you can double kill them with Dusknoir. You can't make that play. Also, this is just a little less demanding on your rare candies. With only 2 rare candy, it's kind of hard to actually candy out a Dusknoir, so that's why I like the double Dusclops. I took the triple Duskull, I guess, idea from them. Not that that's the craziest idea ever, but I do find your Duskulls get targeted down, especially against Gardevoir, so having 3 Duskulls is super nice. Otherwise, there is a Lost Vacuum in the list. I think if people are going to be playing Bravery Charm in Miraidon and Hero's Cape in Gardevoir, there's just a lot of value to be had from Lost Vacuum. Also, you kind of need some stadium bump for like Jamming Tower, and I didn't love Sinnoh. I just found that I never have access to it when I want it against Lugia. You can often use Alakazam or Dusknoir to play around like Legacy Energy, Gift Energy, etc. And coming in at number 1, I have Gardevoir, one of my decks I have a soft spot for sure. So maybe a little bit biased on this deck over Dragapult, but I do think that this deck is just kind of a better version of Dragapult. I mean, Dragapult does 200 damage and 60 to the bench, and it has 320 HP. Gardevoir EX does 190 damage to the active, and then if you have 2 Monkey Dories, you can do 60 damage anywhere, including the active, and then as well, you have 310 HP. So I guess you are weak to dark, and Dragapult has no weakness, so it's a little bit worse statistically than Dragapult, but this deck just has so many more options. You can play the Mawile, you can play the Fluttermane, you can play the Cresselia, you got the Screamtail, which is another super powerful option. And also, Refinement, I think, has the edge over Recon Directive. The ability to just thin out your deck over time, really strong. When I play games with Dragapult, I'll end the game with like 30 cards in my deck, or like 20 cards in my deck. With Gardevoir, I'm usually ending with less than 10 cards in my deck, which just feels good to be able to see and have access to your whole deck. As far as strengths for this deck go, Raging Bolt, Lugia, Arch Aladon all feel pretty favored. And the only major weakness of this deck is Miraidon. Now, if you play the Mawile, that's one potential avenue, like one potential way to counter it. But I think recently everyone seems to be kind of wise to this Mawile plan. They're playing switch carts. Some people are playing Miniors or 2 switch carts, right? So I've kind of decided recently to pivot over to a Klefki approach. If you go first and just jam a Klefki in the active against Miraidon, oftentimes they're not really going to be able to play the game. They rely heavily on Squawkabilly and Miraidon's ability, Tandem Unit, I think. So without access to those abilities, they're going to be doing a lot of like draw, attach, passing. You're also blocking Rotom, unless they have Boss's Orders in their opening hand, or potentially like Secret Boss for Boss's Orders. That also kind of gets them out of it. But otherwise, they're going to be struggling. And the other thing that I've done with this list recently from my last video is I put a Cresselia in my deck. I saw a couple of you making comments on my video that, oh, you need to be playing Cresselia. What should we cut? What should we cut? And I just cut them Mawile for it because I'm kind of shifting to this Klefki plan. So we've got Cresselia in the deck. And then because there's now a Cresselia in this list, you can go ahead and cut the Moonlit Hill. Right now, I'm trying out Pokemon League Headquarters. Seems good. I don't really want to play 2 Artisan because I got the Secret Box, and it's honestly kind of nice to bump Artisan sometimes in the Gardevoir Mirror match, or even like in other matchups where Artisan can get them Iron Bundle. Like against Lugia, for example, you want to bump Mesagoza, but like you don't really want to give them Artisan. So I got the Pokemon League headquarters in there, just trying it out. Seems kind of good versus Miraidon. Could be probably any other stadium. You could play, I mean, I wouldn't play Temple of Sinnoh. You could play like Calamitous Wasteland. You could play, I don't even know. That's why I have a Pokemon League headquarters in my deck, because I can't think of any better options. So that's going to be it for this tier list. Let me know down in the comment section down below which decks are overrated in my opinion, which decks did I underrate. I want to know what you guys think. And other than that, I'll just see you guys in the next video.